Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic Podcast. We share practical insights and wisdom for executives who want to jump into the top 1%. Today, our guest is Cesar Goulart, who is a CIO and longtime tech leader. Cesar has built and led engineering organizations across a number of different verticals. He's held leadership positions at PointRight, Presbyterian Health Services, and Ambev. I met Cesar when he was helping me with some challenges at a healthcare organization that we were having, and he did a fantastic job. I'm really excited to have him on the show today. Welcome to the Technocratic Podcast, Cesar.
Thank you. Thank you. Super happy to be here, Bobby. Super happy to talk about this AI topic that is on everybody's minds these days.
Yeah, AI is going berserk these days. Every CIO, every CTO is thinking about it. And there's a really interesting aspect of AI that is not the innards of how LLMs work, but it's this thing that executives are often thinking about called governance. And maybe you can help us with that. I think CIOs and CTOs are definitely struggling with it. How would you define governance, first of all?
Yeah, I think when you talk about governance, most people go to that place where you think about red tape, you think about groups that are put in place to keep things from happening.
Mhm.
And my view of governance is the exact opposite. These are portfolio management teams that have a certain amount of money that they're putting into strategic initiatives and that need to produce a certain amount of returns from their investments. And how they get there is what I define as governance.
Got it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You hear the word governance and you think about red tape. I've been in some publicly traded companies, privately held companies. Once they get past a certain point in terms of headcount or revenue size or something, this idea of governance becomes more and more important to them. And specifically in product and engineering, it starts becoming more of a thing. And I think 95% plus of engineers will think of governance totally as a blocker to achieving the goals, not as something that will help the goals to happen and make sure that they get done. And now we're living in a world where we're not just coding by ourselves, we have all these AIs and AI agents helping us. So, why do we need good governance around AI, and how can we develop that governance structure in a way where it's helpful and not painful and hurtful?
I think that if you look at what's happened in the stock market with AI and AI expectations on publicly traded companies, that happens in a microcosm, I think, everywhere you work. Anytime people talk about AI, they have all these grandiose dreams about how to achieve fantastic results and not a good idea of how to get there. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of anxiety around achieving these results that whether it's shareholders or your internal stakeholders in your startup or your founders,
Yeah.
and you need to have a good way to get there. So I think that's number one. I think the other one is the knowledge gap that you have around AI. 95% of the people that you have in organizations today want to do AI and don't really have an idea of what AI is good for, what AI is not good for, what risks are inherent with the technology that need to be understood organizationally so that you know where to invest and where to stay away from when it comes to AI. And I think there are other factors, but I think these two are the primary drivers for you to do that. And the other one is around the data science lifecycle. So when you look at how AI is built, it's different than every other type of technology that you build in-house or that you buy from a third party. It follows a different life cycle. Data science teams cannot be forced to work as pseudo development teams. They don't work. Believe me, I tried it and failed before I figured out how to work with a data science team. And so they need to be understood in that life cycle. The level of uncertainty of the life cycle needs to be understood.
One thing that I'm seeing talking to a lot of CEOs, Cesar, is a major concern around AI governance when it comes to security. They're afraid of sharing their company's data with LLM providers and what would happen if it got out there and got hacked or something. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think there's a chapter of device management that we can copy and paste from when it comes to AI. In my mind, there's a notion of managed AI and unmanaged AI. So managed
Mhm.
AI, you own it, you created the model or you host the model that you bought from somebody else, you own the infrastructure, you control what data goes into it, you control what data comes out of it and what's done with that with data. And then you have unmanaged AI, which is all the models that are publicly available, or some models that you can pay a subscription fee, but you don't really have any control over where data goes and what happens with your data. And I think that some people are trying to build one size fits all views of AI and policies to govern that and security and all of that. And anytime I'm asked about it, that's the first thing that I try to differentiate is because you have trust in one and you don't have trust in the other one. And when it
Right.
comes to security and privacy, that's a huge difference. So you can be very flexible when it comes to feeding your managed AI models. And you probably need to be very careful, depending on your industry, when it comes to those unmanaged models where you don't really have control over what's being done with your data.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing CEOs worry a lot about is their there's concern over, like, obviously the data exposure on their own data sets, but then sharing data with customers and working with them and using their data inside the large language models that maybe they use open source large language models. Maybe they use something from OpenAI, but nevertheless, that's like greatly concerning to them, like how they're handling their customer data. So those are really good points. One aspect of governance is security and all of that type of stuff. And then another part of it is policies and compliance with those policies. How should a company handle the way that they're developing the right policy for AI use inside the company, and then making sure that that's enforced in the right way? Is there a framework a company should follow, some structure of how to do that?
I think so. I think when going back to governance, these governance groups need to follow some sort of a standard framework. And I think when looking at that, if organizations already have a governance framework that they're using for product development, something like RICE or something along those lines, start with that. But also understand that because of all the reasons that you just pointed out, there is a new dimension of attributes of these initiatives that you're going to be considering doing. That's before you have those things in place that need to be taken into account. And the first one is risk. What's the risk of not being able to build this is something that we've been asking when we're doing product development. Now we also need to ask the question, assuming that we can build this, what's the risk associated with this thing malfunctioning when it malfunctions, because it will? And what are the ramifications to the company? And I think you need to take the two into account from the onset of these initiatives, when you first start talking about, all the way through the monitoring of how they're performing over the life cycle or the lifetime of that solution.
I think the risk thing is important, but maybe let's just get clear on what is in scope for governance. Here's my list for like governance related stuff in terms of AI. I think it's the policies and procedures about how you use AI. I think that's a big deal. I think it's architectural reviews of your AI capabilities that you're building, the ability to like audit and report on AI inside your companies. How are you compliant or not compliant with your AI and any sort of regulatory standards that are important out there,
Mm-hmm.
like high trust and things like that. There's also, I think, some level of SLAs related to AI that's becoming more of a thing these days. I was talking to a voice AI company, and they obviously have to have SLAs with their customers in terms of response time. But even internally, they use their voice AI to do customer support, so they have to figure out SLAs for that. So if we just think about architecture, audit, best practices, change review stuff, compliance, there's all these complicated things, policies, and procedures related to standing up governance for AI. How should a company that's, let's say, a couple hundred million in revenue, how should they go about standing up this infrastructure? You know what I mean? Because there's a lot here. Yeah, go ahead.
And it is more powerful and dangerous. We talked about risk at length. I think starting with policies is something that everyone should do, just because the workforce needs to be informed as to what they can touch and what they can't touch. So that's step number one. But the next step is going to be, how are you going to really make your business different with AI? And that's
Mm-hmm.
where getting the key stakeholders from the business to talk to technology, to have an understanding of where you see that happening, is the first step. Once you have that view, I think you have a better understanding of what it will take to do that. Are you going to be in the business of building AI solutions internally because your needs are so custom that you're not going to be able to find something out there that you can buy? Well, that positions you in one manner. when it comes to executing this strategy? Are you going to be mostly buying third-party models that you're going to be paying for on a subscription basis? That's a different model that you're going to have to
Yeah.
build to support that. In all cases, and I think something that you just touched on, the traditional technology governance is more focused on the technology. And when it comes to AI, part of it is a consideration in terms of operationalization. How are these models going to be operationalized? How many of these models can be left to run their scope of activities without human supervision? How many
Hmm.
of those have so much inherent risk associated with them that you have to have some sort of a human babysitter in order to effectively operationalize that model? And how do you measure performance over time? Because none of these things are performing at 100%. So what's the threshold below which
Right.
it's not acceptable anymore for that AI model to be functioning for your business? And so all of these
Yeah.
things are the additional dynamics that need to be presented to governance when it comes to AI so they make more informed decisions.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think companies should do to nail down the build by partner question? Build AI, buy AI, or partner for AI? How should companies think about that?
I, because I think managing a data science team and managing the data science lifecycle is something that's very foreign to most companies. I don't think people
Hmm.
should think about that as their first option necessarily. I think the old model, if you can buy it, if you can leverage other people's expertise and not have to maintain an internal and expensive data science organization that will have to then
Yeah.
be integrated into everything else you do in your company, I think please do that. If you can't, if you have some unique requirements, or maybe your product was the case at Point, right? We sold predictive models. So we had to build predictive models. We had to be
Right.
in that business. That was our differentiator. Then a decision is made for you. But I would stay
Hmm.
away from having to build everything as much as I could and only go there if that's what gives you a competitive advantage or the
Yeah.
strategic differentiator.
Yeah. Do you think it's dangerous for healthcare companies to put their data in the hands of OpenAI or Claude or something like that?
I think that the way that OpenAI is selling a lot of their services is through Microsoft Azure. And what Microsoft has gotten very smart with a few years ago, we at PointRight hosted with Microsoft, and is that they've been high trust certifying the vast majority of their cloud services. And when you create an instance of an OpenAI model that is managed, back to the managed and unmanaged definition, then that means that the data that you put into that instance is managed by the same policies that Microsoft certified against high trust. So I
Right.
think you can be more comfortable doing things that way. Now, if you have a partner that has never done business in healthcare specifically and does not have a level of security or level of proficiency managing the data that they can report to you, then yeah, I think you need to be very scared, especially in healthcare when you're dealing with clinical data and everyone is after
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, exactly. These data science teams that have been around for 5, 10+ years, they obviously weren't used to working most of the time with large language models. Are data scientists starting to learn how large language models can help companies, or are they still struggling to wrap their heads around it? Because and just because you're a data scientist doesn't mean LLMs or how to use them or and talk to us about that, and then maybe you can also follow up with how should the companies decide on what the use cases are? Like, what are the right use cases for their organizations? How did they figure that out?
Okay. Answering the first question around data science team, I think you nailed it. I think the vast majority of the data science teams are getting their arms around LLM technology. This is very sophisticated technology that most data science teams are not building themselves. They're focused on more focused models that have specific uses within their organizations, and they're trying to figure that out. Now, having said that, the base technology for LLMs shares a lot in common with everything that they do for these more focused models. So I think they are probably in the best position to get their arms around that and to understand and start serving as internal advisors for that, even though I don't think they're there yet by and large.
Yeah. Agreed. I think they do struggle, but if there's anybody who's gonna learn it, it's probably gonna be them. I've always liked productizing data science teams. Product people can think through the use cases. How should companies who are adopting AI for the first time, how should they think through their use cases?
Oh, I think you're right on the money. I think all of this comes through product. And having a data science team, which was the case when I took over data science, point right was it was just sitting on the side and doing mostly research work that wasn't being used by the product. And once you start aligning your data science team with product capabilities that you need to build, and it just so happens that some of these capabilities could leverage AI and then get
Mm.
assigned to your data science team. But I think the product backlog, the product pipeline is one, and you're not now creating a separate one for AI just because it's a sexy thing today. I think it just becomes part of your product roadmap.
Yeah. Yeah. Should there be, let's say there's $100 million company, they've got an ELT, product leader, technology leader, et cetera, et cetera. Should they go through a like formal process of identifying use cases, or is it better for them to just leave it up to just whatever people come up with? Sales wants this, marketing wants that. How should they figure out what to put in the product?
No, I think they need to be operating at that level. In fact, that time doc, we did that with the executive leadership team after one of the board meetings, where
Mhm.
we went across the company and we got people's best guesses. And this is what we're talking about here. We're not, because AI is not well understood, you're going to get out of these exercises, you're going to get everything from things that you've been able to do for 20 years without the need for AI to things that AI couldn't possibly do because you need magic and everything in between. But I think
Right.
that's the starting point. Get everyone to identify what they believe are their best use cases for AI, and to the extent that they can involve their areas. And the larger the organization, the more you want to do that. But then bring that
Hmm.
up to the ELT level and then run those ideas through some sort of a standard framework to figure out what bubbles up to the top. What are some of the things that really need to be discarded because you don't actually need to do AI, just build a new BI solution for this area and they're done. And which
Yeah.
are the ones that actually have the potential return? I think that's where the conversation starts for
Yeah.
governance is at ELT. And then once you have that at the ELT level, you also know who needs to be in your AI governance group, because it's not all of
Mm.
ELT. You're going to have probably 4 or 5 people in a $200 million company level that probably drive 80% of the value expect from AI. Get those people to be part of your initial AI governance group that are going to take that brainstorming list and start refining that and start identifying the bullseye for AI around the company.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like figuring out ROI is a difficult thing for most companies? I usually look at different organizations and they struggle with how to quantify their return on investment on AI, more so even than other technology investments, product investments. How should an organization go about figuring that out, their
That's
ROI?
always tough, always tough. And the return question is always tough because people want new capabilities, and it's very difficult, especially when you're the product leader, to get people to commit to some sort of a return. But I think that's something that you need to keep fighting for, and it's not going to get any easier. I think especially in the early days of AI, I think to your point, it's harder to quantify returns. But on the other side of this, the cost of building AI is way higher than the cost of building your traditional products. And you need to take that into account too. And because the investment is so much higher, which is something that most people don't think about. I mean, I went to a call with an organization the other day that their vision for AI was to take all of their dashboards, all of their business objects reports,
Hmm.
and feed all of that data into a large language model that they could prompt for anything that was in those reports. And I'm listening to that and I'm saying, do you have any idea of how much money and time you would need to spend training a large language model and then running a large language model to do something that a BI visualization can give you in 30 seconds for like less than
Right.
1% of the cost? So people have their own vision to start with. And I think because the costs are so much higher, when people go away from this view that they have with ChatGPT that everything is free to saying, okay, this is how much it's going to cost to train your LLM for your data, and this is how much it's going to cost you monthly to run this thing for your data, then someone is going to raise the concerns of how much are we generating in return to offset that extra cost?
Yeah, yeah,
So it's
exactly.
super important, more important, I think, even than with product, and not less difficult. So it's a big challenge, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I think the companies that carefully think through their use cases, they don't try to take on too much in the first year of AI adoption or integration into their products. They try to make a projection over what about the future, about ROI, about what this thing is gonna do they have all the step-by-step milestones built into the build and release plan. They do better than the companies that just rush into it and just building AI for the sake of building AI, or the companies that are a lot of companies are approaching it just like in a marketing first kind of way, which is actually it's okay at some level, but they don't have much behind the scenes, but their marketing about AI is like amazing. Unfortunately, then their customers, when they start using their products, they're like, this isn't doing anything for me. So that doesn't really fully work. But I think like you got to be pretty patient and you got to plan it pretty well. And then you start maybe seeing some of the results. I think if it's typically like engineering driven, then it's going to be a lot of experimentation. ROI is going to be unclear. I think it has to be more like product driven, business driven. The business has to set some kind of goals. If you're doing an AI based onboarding on your tool, you should figure out if your success metrics are going to be faster onboarding or something about improved stickiness, or maybe your metric is something just tiny and small inside the product, like the usage on this feature started happening faster than before AI. You really got to think it through, but I think too many companies are just rushing into it without like really thinking it through. Let me ask you this question, Cesar. Why is, in your opinion, AI innovation going hyper fast, and then AI adoption is lagging way down here? Companies are just going so slow. Why do you think there's such a big gap between the two?
I think one is knowledge, internal knowledge of organizations, and having these structures that we're talking about in place so that you pick the right things to invest on. If you start doing what a lot of companies are doing, which is this sort of ad hoc approach to AI, where every department takes money that they have in their budget and they start talking to some sort of AI outfit, and they buy a little
Hmm.
service here and then somebody else buys a little service there. Not one person in the company has a view of what's being done with AI. I think that's a recipe for that type of outcome. I think when you have a more thoughtful approach to things and you start picking the right bets to start with, I think you have a much higher likelihood of starting to get some returns and slowly do more and more.
Yeah, exactly. I think the knowledge thing is huge. The know-how, the knowledge, all of that. I also sense there's a lot of fear that most ELTs have, but they don't admit to it. It's almost like something has got into their minds about this is almost like a doomsday technology, and if we use it, what's going to happen? There's a lot of fear around AI. Have you seen that as well?
I think you have both extremes. You have companies that are paralyzed by fear and that won't touch AI where they should be. And then you have some companies that are so gung ho about the technology that they're not taking the time to figure out, okay, if this thing presents 80% of our clients with incorrect information and there's a huge backslash, what does that do to our business? And ask that question before you put
Yeah.
something out there. So I think like everything else, there's some healthy balance to be had with AI. And again, it starts with governance, because if you have 7 people, 8 people in an ELT, I can guarantee that they have different levels of risk tolerance. They have different views of what they want to accomplish with their respective areas and what the potential is. And if you don't equalize that somehow across that team so that you have some common held views of AI on what's okay and what's not okay and how you're going to go about it, then I think you're asking for trouble
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, you're right. It's two extremes. Either a great deal of fear, or on the other hand, some folks who really are embracing it and using it quite a lot. What we were talking a little bit about a portfolio view on AI. What's your feeling about that?
Just any sort of portfolio management framework that you create in IT, there's this funnel view, right? Where you have a number of things that come into your funnel and that are all these ideas that may be coming from the executive leadership team, maybe coming from operations in the company. And then you have those dimensions that you need to be running these things through, whether it's risk or performance or cost. Now,
Mhm.
how that thing can be operationalized, how it would be deployed. And then at the end of the day, there's something that sort of passes in all of these elements. And those are the nuggets that are the focus of the company at that point. I think when
Yeah.
you have that in place and you do that pretty consistently, and you also have the view that unlike traditional product development, AI has a life of its own. After you develop AI and you deploy AI, something that may be performing extremely well today for something that you didn't anticipate deteriorates, and 12 months from now the thing doesn't do what it's supposed to, and you didn't
Yeah,
change a thing.
exactly. I like that.
So
I like this idea of taking a portfolio view of everything that you're doing with AI in your company and figuring out where in the life cycle each piece is and what is it doing for the business? Should we keep
exactly.
investing in it? What is the return on investment? All of that. That's a really good thought. Now, you mentioned and alluded a little bit to risk management. We talked about CEOs being worried about this or that. But in terms of governance, how should organizations set up the right risk management infrastructure with regards to AI?
I think, like any risk management framework, you need to understand what the risk is of that model, for building the model, for running the model, what risk elements are associated with that. For each one of those, you need to understand what's the potential impact. And what happens if this thing comes to happen? And is there a way that we can mitigate that? So your standard risk management framework, I think, applies really well for this. It's just that you need to be asking different questions when it comes to AI. Because in traditional product development, those are mostly intended to make sure that you can deliver on what you are planning on building. And when it comes to AI, you have to have that additional layer of risk that you're trying to assess that will tell you how that can even be operationalized. So in healthcare, one of the things that you see very commonly is that you don't have the performance level at the threshold that you need in order to remove the human. So because of that, the way for you to mitigate the risk is not to not do AI, because you can still
Mm,
make the physician way more productive with AI, but you can't completely remove the physician because that model can spit out things that aren't appropriate, and the physician needs to be
right.
capable of catching those things. So that all, I think, gets identified up front in governance with risk management, and what you can't mitigate can be a showstopper and something that you could say, okay, we're not going to touch this one.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me what you think, what you feel about this, but like somehow risk management regarding AI in your products and in your organization, even though we've been doing risk management as CTOs and CIOs for years, it seems like a new animal, a new beast. And the reason I say that is because, like, the truth is, even today, Cesar, it's like the chances of the AI hallucinating, for example, are still fairly significant. The chances that AI makes up something just out of the blue happens
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And so, in a lot of ways, if you just think of it simplistically, most applications are CRUD applications. It's input output. It's a well-known element. We've got some fuzzy logic going on in AI that hasn't happened in a long time as far as that scale. I think somehow companies need to think of new risk management approaches and frameworks to AI. I think they can use the existing ones and then build on those. It's not all, for example, just even like testing AI is very difficult. The other day, I was talking to a guy, product leader, VP of product, very experienced guy. And I said, hey, how are you going to monitor your solution once it's out, your AI solution once it's out in the market? He said, oh, we've got Pendo for that. I said, okay, Pendo is not going to monitor the conversation with the large language model. But anyway, they were using Langflow and LangChain and stuff. Eventually, they got to a point where they created their own custom monitoring tool. But these are it's the Wild West. It's 1996, 1997 with the web. There's just no standards. MCP just came around, but that's the first feeling of some kind of standard protocol out there with regards to large language models. And I think even like companies just have to get together and create like risk management frameworks for this stuff because it is different. It is more complicated in a lot of different ways. And people's lack of knowledge is very high right now. It's going to get better and better. But people don't aren't even sure if they're sending their data to OpenAI, or they're sending it to Microsoft. If they use Bedrock, who can see it and use it over there? They don't even know that Anthropic and its relationship to Amazon. It's a crazy world that we're living in. So I
Exactly.
think risk management is a huge deal.
Yeah, and I think the risk, I think having a standard framework that is very focused on AI, because the questions are different. So while the framework may be pretty generic, I think there are different questions that are going to be asking when it comes to AI applications. I think that's one of the elements. The other element is the sort of the technology stack, is the technology platform that
Mm.
you're using for all of this stuff to go through. Because if you figure a scenario where in 10 years you will have data pipelines that are connecting your core applications to multiple AI models. Some of them are providing information to external clients. Some of them may actually be operating the same core application platforms as pseudo users of those applications, and compounding the
Hmm.
issue of where did the error happen? Was it there in the system, or did the AI model fail? And how do you look at that? So you have all of that. And if you do everything from a point to point perspective, if you don't have some sort of what I've been calling an intelligence tier in your organization, where you have one place
Mm.
where you catalog all of these models that are using, you have one place where you document what data you're feeding those models, what are you getting back from those models, what type of review schedule should that model be put under, where you're going to go in and validate that it's still, yeah, it's still performing the way we expected it to, or no, it isn't, so it needs to be tweaked and we need to do it internally, or need to talk to the vendor, but it's no longer doing what we're
Yeah.
expecting. So if you don't have some central repository for
Hmm.
doing that, then I think you're doomed, because these businesses are going to be too complicated and you won't know what's
Yeah.
running the business anymore.
Yeah, I love the central repository idea. Last question says, are agents. Agents are all over the place right now. Big hype around agents. I'm sure you heard Codex came out from OpenAI. That's a coding agent. There's all kinds of different kinds of agents out there. Everybody's like thinking, how big is this going to be? Is this going to be like bigger than the large language models themselves? To what role do agents play in governance, and how governance is structured, first of all, and then what is your kind of vision for agents in the enterprise?
I think they just become different types of AI that
Mm,
you're going to be investing on. I think that agents are going to be a much bigger change agent than large language models by themselves have been thus far, because that's when you combine the ability to articulate something with the ability to actually operate something, execute something, and not just talking about it. And I think when that happens is really when you're talking about taking entire parts of your operation and having AI models that are actually going to operate your business, as opposed to advise your business, as opposed to serving as a tool for your employees to use. They really become the operation. And I think
mhm,
that happens through specialized agents, that
mhm,
whether it's coding or it's billing processes that you have that are fully automated with no human intervention, from the time someone chats with a bot on your website to the time something gets fixed in their bill and
mhm.
resent, and all
Yep.
done through LLMs working with agents in
Mhm.
the background that are going to actually be doing all the legwork.
Yeah. That seems to be like the prevailing thought right now. But what about this thing? I think I've been thinking a lot about this idea that like we wanted Siri to become agent. We wanted that to become a thing in our lives. Apple has huge market share, and it didn't become a thing in the lives of most people. I just use it to turn on music and check the weather, and that's how it's
Sure.
been for the last 5 years. And all kinds of companies have tried agents before. And for some reason, I think that not for some reason, but I think there's many reasons why has not caught on yet. What do you feel like is the reason AI-based agents will catch on? But specifically, like in the enterprise, I was giving you some B2C examples. It's actually even worse in the enterprise. Like in the B2B world, nobody uses agents until now. What will work about this current generation of AI-based agents?
I think what makes it much harder for someone like Apple or Google or Meta to build their intelligence tiers is that how broad they need to be, right? They're trying to do
Mm,
everything for everyone. And I think the challenge becomes much bigger when it comes to that. I think that one of the things that will make agents much more effective in driving change is that they're much more function specific. So, for example, you go to a healthcare appointment today, and you have someone in most places who's called a scribe that follows your doctor around and that basically types everything into an electronic health record system. That is like a prime use case for replacing that individual with an agent that does one thing for a living, doesn't try to be Siri, but it can take medical terminology and code it in very standardized form and enter that
Right.
into the company's EHR the same
Right.
way every day of the week. And I
Yeah.
think that's what starts making the change, because building that type of AI solution is not nearly as daunting as trying to build Siri,
Hmm.
and
Yep.
it has a huge return
Yeah.
because it's very use case specific.
Yeah, specialized. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think if these AIs, especially with MCP, can be very specialized, do one or two jobs really well, plus use MCP to actually talk to other systems in a far superior way than Siri or something like that, then I think they'll succeed. Okay, I think we're at the end of our time. I'm sure our listeners will have taken a lot from this conversation. It was a pleasure talking with you today, Cesar.
My pleasure. Super exciting topic. I can be going for hours and hours on it.
Yep. And thank you to our audience for joining. You can catch us on technocratic.io, where all the rest of our podcasts are. In the meantime, keep the sharks swimming, and I'll see you next week.